for someone who wants to live with a person that they'd be more comfortable with, to not be able to do that would just be incredibly frustrating. And I think a lot of times in transitioning, there are a lot of frustrating moments.
Chase Stokes' roommate selection process seems average upon first glance. Like many, he used a housing Facebook page, but there was one difference. Stokes, a transgender man, found his roommate in a group for people seeking female roommates.
I just felt like it would be more comfortable for both parties, especially because I didn't know how comfortable a male would be with me, like, being in his space if he didn't see me as fully male, or if there was some issue there. And the same thing could have happened with a woman, but I just felt like it was a little bit safer for play. And I didn't have to go through bureaucracy of Northwestern or anything like that.
Northwestern designates housing assignments based on records received from Caesar, university spokesman Bob Rowley said in an email. The Common Application and the Universal College Application typically ask students to mark both their sex and gender. Rowley said Northwestern pulls undergraduate students' sex from Caesar and sends it to residential services. Students fill out a housing application on Caesar before being assigned a room. Stokes said a field for gender had automatically labeled him as female, and he could not change it.
I figured it would just be easier to find a female roommate in that way. So we kind of started messaging each other over the summer, springtime-ish of 2017, before we came to Northwestern, and hit it off. We have a lot of habits in common, so thus far it's been really great. I love her to death, and I'm very happy to have roomed with her.
I think it's funny when I'm walking around campus and I'm talking to people and I mention my roommate and I use he, him, his pronouns, and people are like, what? And I'm like, it's not a big deal. It's about the person, not the gender. And I think that people get really caught up in the binary of gender, and yeah, that's something our society should move past.
According to Lambda Legal, a national LGBTQ advocacy organization, Title IX mandates that institutions receiving federal funding grant students a legal right to be placed in campus housing according to their gender identity. At Northwestern, Foster Walker Complex is the only undergraduate residential facility with gender-open housing for the 2017-18 academic year. The All-Singles Residence Hall has 2 designated wings for gender-open housing. However, Vice President for Student Affairs Patricia Telles-Irvin said she is reluctant to place first-year students there. She said the university considers applications to gender-open housing in Foster Walker for first-year students, but she prefers that they live in buildings she believes are more social to ease their transition into college.
It's a cop-out, I feel on the university. You're like, oh, let's make the only gender-open option singles. That's not getting to the point of gender-open housing. It's not helping students who have to figure out the whole having a roommate situation. This dorm is not a very good social space. So why would you pick that as a place for something that's supposed to be a positive step? I don't know. There's just a lot of negatives I see with that decision.
Jennifer Luttig-Komrosky, Executive Director of Residential Services, said the office uses students' feedback to change the housing experience. She added that in addition to Foster Walker, next year's gender-open housing options will include Kemper Hall and 560 Lincoln. In 2017, Associated Student Government's Trans Rights Subcommittee advocated to residential services, asking the office to house transgender students, quote, who inform the college that they are trans in a timely manner in keeping with their gender identity, end quote. The subcommittee also pushed for increased gender-open housing options. Stokes considers himself lucky to have found a roommate with whom he feels comfortable. However, Weinberg freshman Ezra Okeson feels he did not fare as well. Okeson, a transgender man, said that after being told he would be able to live with a male roommate and male suitemates, which was his preference, he was assigned to live by himself, in a double in 560 Lincoln without a roommate or suitemates.
As an incoming freshman, I was upset. I wanted a roommate. I didn't want to be totally alone and isolated. As a freshman, you don't know anybody. After a lot of negotiation, I tried to be in a single with a suitemate, with male suitemates. They said, oh, there are none available, which I don't believe that was true. Because as soon as I said, oh, fine, I'll room with women suitemates, they were like, oh, great, here's a room. I was disappointed, honestly. I expected Northwestern to be better than this. They advertised that they were better than this.
Luttig-Komrosky said she could not comment on individual housing arrangements, but said room assignments are, quote, constantly in motion, end quote. Okeson said he is not opposed to living with female suitemates, but would prefer to live with men. In Illinois, a person must provide proof signed by a licensed healthcare professional stating they underwent gender transition treatment to legally change their gender on their birth certificate, among other steps. Stokes and Okeson said changing legal documentation can be complicated.
There's a myriad of issues that could hinder someone's ability to like change their legal sex. There's any and all familial issues. Like if a family is not accepting, you can't. It's difficult, even being a legal adult, to change your legal sex and have that work with your family. There's the actual legal process of changing your sex, which can be difficult and varies from state to state. Some states require many years of being on hormone therapy or surgeries. There's a lot of different things that can get in the way of someone changing legal sex, especially at our age.
When you get your name legally changed, there's like a million other things you have to get changed, and it's not like one and done. And so to have all these like multiple steps that people who identify with the sex they were assigned at birth don't have to go through is just kind of frustrating.
According to NU's application for change of demographic information, if students, quote, have changed gender on legal documents, end quote, they can apply to have this reflected on university records. Students who, quote, no longer identify with their birth gender or are going through gender transition, end quote, can also request a change to unknown gender on their university records. This process requires no additional documentation. However, Stokes said altering university records can present obstacles.
My gender marker was female for all of my application, and I couldn't change it unless I had a wild card. So like I tried to change over the summer, but it was going to be really complicated, and I was going to have to like come to Evanston to do it, and I'm not from Chicago, so it wasn't really like accessible.
For students in gender-open housing, their sex as designated on university records does not influence roommate assignments. Luttig-Komrosky said participation in gender-open housing has typically demanded only one location. Still, multiple students raised concerns about Foster Walker being the only gender-open housing site this academic year.
That has a lot of financial issues, social issues. You know, you shouldn't have to feel excluded in that way, and there's a trauma associated with having to be excluded in the place you live and having to feel ostracized and having to be ostracized from the rest of your community, you know, on your floor.
Students also raised concerns about the price and locations of next year's gender-open housing options. Singles are more expensive than doubles, and none of these residences are on the south end of campus.
It is certainly limiting that like no place is truly south, not counting Plex, because I don't count Plex as truly south, that have gender-open housing options. And I think they should. I think it should be spread at least to a couple dorms around on like all ends of campus, especially as housing is so like polarized on both ends.
Having to be stuck in Plex, which is a building that has many issues, or being stuck in this very expensive building when you may not be able to afford it, is also, you know, a bit problematic. And especially with a 2-year live-on requirement, a lot of people would like the option of going to a different building where, say, their friends are, ones that are closer to their classes.
Currently, residential life seems to have like all these different options, right, as far as like what your experience wants to be, and if they're only offering gender-open housing a certain number of options, then you're not providing those options to all students. It's a half step, or not even a half step. It's just not really like getting there.
Luttig-Komrosky said the university's decision to add gender-open housing locations at 560 Lincoln and Kemper Hall for next academic year will diversify room type, building amenities, and price points. She added that residential services will continue to evolve the gender-open housing program with student feedback. Though Caesar still marks Stokes as female, he will live in the Phi Delta Theta fraternity house next year with a roommate who identifies as a man. Luttig-Komrosky said residential services does not manage roommate assignments in fraternity houses. Phi Delta President Robert Connolly said the fraternity welcomes new members based on their character rather than on gender identity.
I hope that people, you know, when joining organizations are evaluated like on their character, their personality, etc., and that their gender identity or the gender that they were, you know, born with shouldn't be like the predominant factor in making the decision as to accept them into your organization. You know, I hope to see that become a reality, you know, for all of Greek life, and that would play into housing as well.
Stokes said he would like to facilitate communication between transgender students and administrators through Rainbow Alliance, an LGBTQ student organization.
In terms of trans people who are rooming with people of their sex assigned at birth and are uncomfortable with that, we would provide a space that they would feel comfortable talking about that. Maybe we could get them in touch with some administration or like some other form of help in terms of like changing housing or figuring something else out. Mostly what I see our role as being would be a place of support for those students and just making sure that they know that they're still, valid in their gender identity and valid in their presentation and stuff like that.
In addition, Stokes hopes to see changes in the way housing and gender issues are discussed at Northwestern.
I think I'd just like to see a little bit more acknowledgement of like trans issues, just because I think there's a lot of the way that we speak and a lot of the way that we like talk about housing, especially, is in like a lot of binary coded language where like you'll be talking about like male or female housing, just like have more of a connection there in terms of how to include trans people in your daily lives.
And while Stokes said he is happy with his roommate situation, he said identifying as a transgender man still adds struggles to the housing process.
I think if I had not found a female roommate that I was comfortable with, or if I like had chosen to try and start like finding a male roommate or something like that, I think it would have been just more frustrating. Like it would have made me really nervous because like you're really putting yourself out there in a way that cis people don't really have to, because like when you come out as trans, you're like there's a lot of associations that come with that, and so like people will assume that they kind of understand your story or that they kind of know your general like background, and that doesn't happen when you just like when you don't have to come out in that way. But it's just a little bit more tense, I think, when you're trans and like trying to figure out like, does this person not want to live with me because I'm trans, or do they not want to live with me because I wake up at 10:30 in the morning and they wake up at 8? Like there's just a little bit of like it's just a little bit more nerve-wracking.